All right, folks, thanks for joining. I look forward to speaking with you all. Can you let me know in the chat that you can hear me okay? Okay, thank you so much. Let's get started. All right, well, thank you so much, Techqueria, for having me. This is such an honor to talk with everyone today. This is going to be a more informal cafecito session with approachable advice. We'll pause throughout to take questions if you have any. So please don't hesitate. Feel free to use the chat throughout. I'll be checking it. I've got it up on my screen. So if something resonates with you, let me know. Or if you want to dive into a topic deeper, please let me know as well. What we're going to do today is we're going to cover my credentials, right? Why are we here today? And then get into the session itself. So here we go. Today, we're going to discuss how to succeed and increase your impact as a leader, and not just any leader, but specifically in volunteer leadership roles. I really would like to hear from you. Who has a volunteer leadership role here? Put it in the chat what that role is if you've got it. And for example, these are ERG leadership roles. Do you sit on a DEI council? Do you sit on an auxiliary board? Any type of role like that, where you're donating your time, right? Or you're getting something extra. It's a +1 type of role. Does anyone have one of those that they'd like to share? Please throw it in the chat so I can see just who I'm talking to here. We know that many Latinos hold these types of roles at work and within their community. They take these roles on because they're passionate, they want to make a difference, they want to promote DEI, but they often don't receive that proper training on how to be a successful leader at themselves or how to lead these volunteer teams. There's very often no playbook on how to do it. So I see that Jesus, you're on a nonprofit board. Nancy is an ERG leader. We've got another ERG leader. Awesome. Thanks for sharing those. Yeah, so this is exactly what we're talking about here. And let us know if you have questions throughout the panel. So if this resonates with you as well, any of the topics we talk about today, this is a shorter session, and you want to talk more either about your unique challenges that you're facing as a leader or your team as a whole. I consult with companies all the time, and I also take one-on-one meetings. So don't hesitate to shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to chat with anyone because I've been in these trenches myself. So why are we listening to me today? Why did Techqueria ask me to speak? I'm an authority on this topic because I have been in your shoes. I've led many teams as a volunteer leader myself, and also led global DEI programs that supported them. So professionally, I'm a techie turned global DEI leader turned now entrepreneur. I've got 10 years of experience at the world's best consulting firms, and my tech background is in data science, analytics, and insights. So shout out to my data folks. But for me, after the equity reckoning of 2020, that was really driven by George Floyd's murder, I, like many of you, I'm sure, was called to do more. And I moved into DEI full time at that time, right? In my most recent role, I was leading strategic programs, specifically our ERGs at Avanade for 60,000 employees. So I'm very familiar with this and happy to chat about it. Outside of work, I think there isn't a Latino or education org that I haven't supported. I've held board roles with JA, the YWCA, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, the Wisconsin Hispanic Scholarship Foundation, ASE, Latinas in Tech, many orgs and many teams. And all this to say, whatever you're facing, I've been there and you're not alone. And most importantly, the type of leadership that I bring into these volunteer roles personally is very curated, right? It's very different than how I might lead a business team or how I might lead executive teams, because I know that these are volunteers. So that's what I want to talk about today. All right. Awesome. Really glad to see your comments still coming in on where you personally are a leader. So let's review how to be a strategic leader in these roles and where to focus based on what stage you're in. So we're going to talk about two different stages, that of you're just getting started and that of established groups and leadership roles that are associated with them. So getting started. This might be folks who you've just founded your group. So maybe you just founded an ERG at your company, you reignited it after a few years, or you're an auxiliary board for a nonprofit that has just been put into a place, a new chapter within your city, or you're stepping into an existing group that is still kind of in its infancy, right? It's not as developmentally mature, or you're just getting started. So there's a couple of focus areas here when you're in that type of role. So this is for getting started. Your focus areas here, and we'll go into them, are developing your strategic priorities, building engagement, and documenting learnings. So let's talk about those a little bit more. When you're getting started, it's really important to have those strategic priorities well defined. What are you going to focus on, right? And that's something that you need to land on with your team as a whole. It's not something that you alone set as a leader. It's not something your executive sponsor sets for you, right? Or the organization that you roll up into. They might have some general priorities or goals for you, but it's really up to you and your team to decide, just what do you want to focus on this year? And those should be really specific, actionable, and measurable. So a strategic priority for a group that is just getting started, right? It might be to establish programming, right? For a single fiscal year, maybe you're going to set out to have one event per quarter. Aside from events, maybe you're going to set out to fundraise X amount of dollars, right? Fundraise $5,000 this year. Maybe your strategic priority is to get a team in place, right? A lot of times when you're in that fundamental phase, you're bringing folks on, you're building out your team from just you or you and a vice chair to you plus 10 people, right? Having that as a strategic priority is wonderful because it does take a lot of time, right? These groups, as we all know, they're not just to have events. They're not just to socialize. These are really important groups. And as you're getting started, you're building that foundation of how you're going to operate. So that is around developing your strategic priorities. The next focus area for you guys is building engagement. So how are you going to connect with your constituents, right? How are you going to connect with your members? That is a key thing for you guys to define in this stage. So are you going to connect with them at events? Are you going to connect with them via social media or digitally? Are you going to connect with them through headquarters, right? If you're an ERG, you need to understand what is the appropriate level to connect with members or employees and what are the boundaries there. So you're going to start to build engagement, let folks know not only who you are, but what you're working towards, right? To share a little bit of those priorities that you've defined with them so that they can understand the value proposition of being a member, right? Or being associated with you. A lot of times it has to do with driving belonging, right? Creating a place for folks, driving community, but it can also go a step further into professional development, right? And helping them succeed either personally or professionally. So building engagement is really important and checking in on that all throughout the process. And then finally, it's documenting those learnings. Not the sexiest part of leading these groups, right? But it is really keeping track of, okay, I ran X event for Hispanic Heritage Month. Here are all my planning documents that went into it. Now it's after the event happens, going back and debriefing with your team. What went well? What went wrong? How are we going to document this all? So then next year, you're not starting from zero. Or 2 years from now, they're able to see, what the team tried, what worked and what failed. It's really important, I think, in these volunteer groups to document those failures or those learnings so that future teams aren't just making the same mistakes over and over again. So those are your 3 focuses when you're getting started: developing your strategic priorities, building engagement, and documenting learnings. Let me know in the chat, are those things that you're currently focused on? Are those new? We're hearing new things. Let me know. Next, I want to talk about where to focus or how to be strategic if you are an established group, right? So I saw some of folks in the chat are leaders of more established groups, which means those groups have been around longer, or they've moved already from a fundamental stage into a programmatic or strategic phase. If some of those words sound a little foreign to you, go ahead and look up the maturity stages of an ERG, right? There's very specific kind of categories that you guys can place yourselves into that will help you say, okay, here I am today, here's where I want to get to next year. And ERGs and nonprofit boards operate really similarly, so you guys can take learnings from each other. So here, your focuses are scaling, right? Identifying what growth looks like to your group, moving from programmatic to strategic, building your operations infrastructure, and team development. So when I talk about scaling, first and foremost, we're talking about growth. And growing your ERG sounds easy. It sounds like an easy goal. Growing your chapter, right? Maybe it's growing membership. Maybe it's growing the amount of events you have, growing your team. For some groups, it's going to look like geographically, how do you grow from a single city into a region? How do you go? I live in Chicago, the best city in the US. How do you go from Chicago to Midwest when you're reaching folks or your audience? Or how do you grow from the Midwest to national, to then international? And at what level do you want to do so? What makes sense? Because we don't want to just put those growth goals in for the sake of it, right? We don't want to have any arbitrary goals in this type of work because we need to focus on what is achievable and measurable. So that is your first focus area for an established group. It's identifying a growth plan. And if you haven't worked on something like that before, that's a great time to pull in an executive sponsor, your personal sponsor or mentor, or seek out other chapters of maybe the nonprofit that you work for. It's what does that growth look like for you in the next fiscal year in 2025, but also what is your 5-year plan to what this group that you're on is working towards so that you can figure out what is that growth goal. Next is moving from programmatic to strategic in terms of your group's maturity. Programmatic means you've started to diversify your programming, right? So you've gone from maybe cultural events, happy hours, to a fundraiser in there, a professional development, and you want to move on to the next stage, which is a more strategic group where they're looking at the larger goals of your company or headquarters and looking at how they can be the catalyst to achieve some of those goals. So here you're looking at how do you continue to diversify programming? How do you continue to meet your audience in different ways, right? Because folks and members of these groups, they don't want to just engage with you in one way. So finding a way to put on programming that resonates with them and also prioritize impact with everything that you're putting on, whether it is raising money, hosting events, creating mentorship circles, everything must tie back to your strategy. And you want to make sure that it's very diversified. The third focus area for established groups is building your operations infrastructure. So once you have that foundation down, you've kind of got a good sense of what you're doing. It's building out an infrastructure and building out that playbook that you were missing in the infancy. It's documenting all of your roles and responsibilities, your strategy, your roadmap, your expectations, what success looks like, and all of those learnings as well. Having that documented, which is so much work, is really crucial. I want to just ask you guys, are you currently working without a playbook, with one, or is that something you're trying to build? So do you have one already? Are you just kind of going with the flow, or are you going to be the one to put one into place? In that playbook, okay, awesome, trying to build. Having all of that documented not only helps you as a leader to show, your personal impact, but it helps your team understand where they fit in, how they can succeed, what's expected of them, and it also helps future teams succeed so they can understand where has this group already been, so I know where do I need to go. Awesome, Nancy, building a new playbook, and that's what I typically hear, right? We usually don't have one, or we're optimizing or trying to build one ourselves, and that's such a crucial piece of your operations in these groups. Hi, Lucia. And then finally, for established groups, your focus area should be around team development, improving how your team works together. What are those working norms? What's the team culture? Because what we'll talk about next is just how different it is working with volunteers, as I'm sure you guys are all super familiar with, right? So you need to be thinking about all the time as a volunteer leader, how you're developing that team and how you're caring about them. Okay, next we're going to talk about how to motivate these teams specifically. And if you have any questions, don't forget, go ahead and put them in and I'll cover them as we go. So a really crucial piece in succeeding in these volunteer roles is motivating your team. I don't know about you guys, but I've had zero success treating these roles the same as I would my day job. And that is because of the context that comes with them. No matter what type of volunteer role you have, everyone who is reporting up to you or everyone working alongside of you, they're volunteering. They're not getting paid, right? For some of them, that means that they will give you every spare moment that they have. And for others, they'll give what they can. And even for others, they'll kind of check in and out. They'll be in and out as they can, because everyone approaches volunteering really differently. These roles also have a really high emotional toll. Anything touching DEI is highly emotional. It's emotional labor. And that's what I want you guys to all remember as volunteer leaders as we approach the elections, right? As we come up on anniversaries like we had yesterday, know that all of that extra feeling, all of that extra just emotional work that folks have to do just to show up for their day job, it's even more so in these volunteer roles, right? So that is part of the context in leading them. And also remembering that this is not folks' number one priority, right? If we're not getting paid for it, right? But also for some folks, they are serving in several roles, or this is the fifth thing on their to-do list. So what I want to get to here is that your typical style needs an adjustment. So when you're working with or alongside or leading these teams, so how do we lead them? I think that's the key word that we have to remember. You need to emerge in these roles as a leader, a motivator, an empowerer, not a manager. You're not going to be managing your team or even the tasks. It's a very different mindset. Here, where I really like to study is that transformational leadership style that works really, really well. And transformational leadership means you get to a level of leadership where you're able to motivate and lead through others, right? So me, if I was working with a vice chair, I'm empowering them to actually do the work. And I'm doing any of the removing the red tape, maybe the unsexy tasks so that they can thrive. That's what it means to lead versus manage in these cases. Okay, so we've established your number one responsibility. It's guiding your team to drive impact and achieve your group's collective goals. So some examples of what that does not look like. It does not look like you as the leader setting the plan for everything and just delegating out tasks. It also doesn't mean you picking every single thing up so that things don't fall through the cracks. Does anyone have an issue with that? I know I do. When you see something like, oh, I see that they're going to miss this, right? Or it would just be easier if I go ahead and take on this task. It would be easier for everyone if I take this. That is not what a leader does. What a leader does is empower their teams to achieve those goals and deliverables that they're accountable for. It looks more like checking in to say, what barriers can I unblock for you, right? I see that this is at risk. How can I help you achieve it? So it takes a very different mindset and style, and it's more about checking in and enabling versus doing everything yourself. And I think that that's also how you survive these roles, is that you don't get overwhelmed, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that next. So I'm going to pause. Does anyone have any questions that they would like me to cover? Okay, I'll wait for those to come in. What I want to close with is, excuse me, is how to survive and thrive in these roles. So this is my final step of my overview in succeeding and driving impact as a leader, is also just how to get through them. They're really, really difficult at times, right? So I want to talk about how to not only get through them, but how to enjoy them and overcome some of the common but maybe not discussed issues that come along with volunteer leadership roles. So we need to, I think, as we're having a hard time, we need to step back and remember our why and accepting the role and really reflect on that often. And I mean that, like maybe check in with yourself once a month to say, is this leadership role that I'm holding, is this role that I'm spending on average 20 hours a month on, right? That is a stat for you. That is how much a typical ERG chair spends per month, 20 hours extra outside of their day job, right? So why did I take this on? Is that still happening? Just because we sign up for these volunteer leadership roles doesn't mean that you can't step down, doesn't mean that you can't seek help, right? And that you need to remember that these roles need to serve you as well. They need to add value to your life, and they also need to be that bright spot in your day, right? It's not going to be every day, every conversation, but a lot of these roles are kind of the dream leadership roles that we take on, right? To be able to serve as the head of your nonprofit chapter, to be able to be on a leadership board and serve as a committee lead, right? We do that because we truly care and we're passionate. So we need to reflect and make sure that we're still feeling that and getting that in return. When that isn't happening, I want you guys to consider a few things. One, it's always okay to step away, right? To take a break or step away fully if that role truly isn't serving you. But more than anything, I want you all to seek support from each other, but also support from your advisor. So if you're on a nonprofit board, you might have an advisor with HQ. If you're an ERG leader, you might have an advisor within the DEI team, a DEI council, really similarly. It's not normal for you to dread coming into these roles, to dread meeting with your team. If you're in that place, that's where I want you guys to seek support, especially in this time of year and with what we have coming up. I don't want to see you guys get burnt out or just take all of this on without support. That's where an executive sponsor can help you understand, is what's happening in my group normal right now? Is it a struggle of team leadership? Or is it something that I really need help with? Do I need more funding? Or do I need someone to come and help with a personnel issue or an escalation? So I think that's something that we don't talk about enough as volunteer leaders, is the toll that it takes on ourselves. Even if we're doing everything right, if we have a wonderful team, this is just very hard and very emotional work. So that is what I wanted to close with. I see that Yasmin has a question, so I'm going to read that. She says, at my company, I'm the co-lead of our Latinx community, but I only have one person in this volunteering role with me. What tips do you give when you have such a small team to manage your time and resources? I love that question, and shout out to you, Yasmin, for taking that on. So you're kind of in that foundational stage, right? You're co-leading it with one other person. I think it's really important to define, what do you want to accomplish right now, right? For the next probably fiscal year, or look at 2025 as a great starting place. So work with your co-lead to think about, what can we realistically achieve us to? Plot that out, whether it is how many events you want to have, your impact, etc. I would keep that extremely light, Yasmin. So maybe 1 or 2 events, right? Maybe 1 or 2 events total, or up to 1 a quarter, depending on your bandwidth. And once you have that plan in place, I would also go to your advisor, right? Or in this case, your co-lead of the Latinx community. So maybe that is an advisor within the larger org, etc. That was also a great time to tell them, okay, here's what I'm going to accomplish with 2 people. If I had more, I could accomplish X, right? Or if I had more funding, my co-lead and I could accomplish X. That's a great way to utilize your stakeholders, let them know where you're at, what you're going to achieve, but also what is possible if you had more support. So that is how I would start in terms of strategy, planning. And when it comes to your time and resources, I'd be really intentional with being open and honest with your co-lead and saying, okay, here's what I can focus on. Here's what I can commit, so that you guys aren't bumping heads, no tension develops, but also just so that you're really transparent with each other as humans. If this is what we can achieve together, and be very specific in kind of delegating those tasks out. Any other questions before we've got about 4 minutes left? I hope that helped, Jasmine. Sending you all the vibes to achieve this year with your two-person team, small but mighty. Okay, another question we have is ERG leadership versus board volunteer leadership. What are some crucial leadership approach differences that I want to point out? I think that the biggest difference between ERG leadership versus volunteer board leadership is ERG leaders have the benefit of having their company's support, right? Because a company has usually more funding. They have hopefully a dedicated person supporting ERGs, right? They might have a few people, they might have one, or they'll at least have a DEI delegate who can help guide the ERGs in getting started, setting overall goals, but also supporting their operations day to day and helping with escalations, versus a volunteer board leadership that ties into a nonprofit, has less resources and less structure. So it's on those leaders to develop a lot more of that themselves, to build the infrastructure and operations, which can be very fun if you love to make decisions, if you like to be that person who starts things out, but can be really difficult if you struggle with that, or if you struggle with ambiguity as a leader, because those roles are a little bit more ambiguous and they have less funding overall. So I think ERG leaderships have sometimes a little bit of advantages when it comes to resources, and leadership board nonprofit roles have more freedom, which is a great advantage if you love to lead that way, but can also be more challenging. Okay, everyone, it is now, for me in Chicago, it is 1:59, so I'm going to close out the session now. Just want to thank you all so much for joining, for listening, and I really want to reiterate that I'm here. If you'd like to have a one-on-one chat, shoot me a message. If you'd like me to come in and talk to your group, I'd be more than happy to do so. So thank you again, Techqueria, and I'll close that now. Adios.